Hey, good afternoon and welcome to this month's Google Hangout with Fire Engineering. It's the first Wednesday of the month. I'm your co-host, Steve Pegram, Fire Chief in Goshen, Ohio, and the President of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. And my co-host, Aaron Heller, is here with me, Captain in Hamilton, New Jersey, and who's also from the same Mercer County. All three of us used to work and got to know each other some 20 years ago. We're going to be talking today about mentoring, which I think is an important topic for the fire service and for training. But first, we're going to go and talk to Bobby Halton, the editor of Fire Engineering Magazine and the head man in charge of the greatest show on earth, FD.
I don't know. I don't know if I can live up to that billing there. I'm not the head man in charge of FDIC. I'm one of the players, and very grateful for everybody allowing me to continue to participate. And that's a pretty amazing experience. If you haven't been, please consider it. We got all the calls for papers in, and they're out to all the reviewers right now. So if you submitted to teach at FDIC, it's currently in the process. That process will continue till about September. Takes a long time. Every one of your papers is reviewed by at least 7 or 8 people. Then it goes on to the executive committee where it's reviewed again. Then it goes on to the final selection process where it's reviewed again. So everybody gets as much attention as we possibly can. If you're not selected, some of the reasons might be that you're not writing for us, or we don't know who you are, or there could be any variety of reasons, but generally it's because we really don't know who you are, or we haven't seen any writing from you or blogging. So if you're interested in really being selected for FDIC, one of the best ways is to be a contributor to either Fire Engineering or Fire Rescue or Firefighter Nation or fireengineering.com, and that really gets you into the process, into the queue, so to speak. So if you did submit, please stand by, and we'll be getting back with you pretty quickly, one way or the other. And if you do not get selected, please feel free to reach out to me. And it's generally because we don't know who you are, or we don't know what your connection to the topic is. So that's kind of where we're at. Kind of an interesting thing I just did, and I'll share. Steve will probably talk a little bit about it today. I just got back from Illinois, where I had a wonderful visit with two different groups. One of the groups was the Illinois Fire Protection District leadership, which was a really interesting group of folks, the folks who run the fire protection districts out there. Great, you talk about mentors and leadership, really a great group of people who really get it and really are doing a tremendous work. And the state of Illinois, as we all know, has been taken over by bureaucrats, and so they've got more layers of. Apparently, they were telling me there are more laws in the state of Illinois than any other state in the United States, and I absolutely believe it. So it was great to meet with them. The other group that I was with was the Illinois Fire Services Institute with Gavin Horn and Denise Smith and Stevie Kerber from UL, and we were looking at some of the effects, cardiovascular effects and toxic effects of structural firefighting. And it was pretty neat looking at all the bio stuff and looking at the off-gassing, and it was a really great experience, and we'll be writing more about it. Kenny just sent me a wonderful, Kenny Horn just sent me and Gavin Horn and some of the other folks just sent me a beautiful article about some of the stuff they're doing, and some of our friends are doing down in Australia, which will be coming out in August. So some great mentoring coming from those good folks as well. So what other updates do we have? Geez, Steve, I'm trying to think, scratching my brain here. Oh, nominations for George D. Post for FDIC 2016. Now's the time to be thinking about those kinds of things, as well as the Courage and Valor Award. If you know somebody who's done something, get that stuff in now so we can do the homework and do the research and get all that done for you. So I think that's all I have, Steve. Sorry to ramble on.
That's great. Thank you, Bobby. And before we get into our topic for today, talking about mentoring, today is the anniversary of the Hackensack Ford fire, which occurred in New Jersey, in Hackensack, New Jersey, 27 years ago. If you're not familiar with this fire, you really should be. And if you are familiar with it, it's a good opportunity, a good training topic for the day, even if it's just over the kitchen table. There's some videos online that you can watch I posted them on Facebook and Twitter today on my Facebook and Twitter sites. But I just wanted to go to my co-host Aaron real quick, and Aaron, could you just talk briefly about Hackensack Ford and what that means to not just the fire service in New Jersey, but the fire service and training nationwide?
Sure, sure. Hackensack Ford, you know, it was summer of '88. A lot of us who are elder statesmen, I guess, in the fire service now were fairly young guys at the time, and it was a hugely impactful fire on the fire service. You know, we knew that there were truss roof failures from previous fires. We knew about wall bombs and so many other fires that killed guys. But here in Jersey, when 5 guys get killed in an auto dealership fire, you know, it was a huge deal. It changed the way we looked at things. I hope it did anyway. And it helped us to learn, unfortunately, on the backs of those guys and on the backs of everybody who was involved in the fire. When you go back and you read the reports on it, the mistakes that were made were common at the time, and unfortunately, when you read some NIST reports and some other things, you know, NIOSH reports later on, we've made some of these same errors again, and we've lost firemen because of it. So it was very impactful. It showed us again the importance of communication. It showed us again the importance of stretching the right line and having a good water supply. It showed us the importance of recognizing building construction and the truss roofs, and you know, it's one of those again where we have a beautiful monument built in Hackensack, and unfortunately it's built on the backs of those who left us way too soon. But I believe that, you know, it affected everybody in the fire service. It gave us another big wake-up call. That was our sofa store fire of that era, I would say. You know, as the Wald Bombs fire had happened in a bit of an era before ours. So it seems that, unfortunately, history has repeated itself, and it's bound to if we don't listen to the lessons we've learned from it.
Steve, just so you know, we posted from the vault information about the Hackensack fire on fireengineering.com. So if you go to fireengineering.com after this hangout, you can read more about it. Also, I forgot to mention that I'm going to have to cut out a little bit early today from the hangout. I apologize for that, but I've got to go to have my medicines checked and get my blood draw and all that good stuff today. It's the first Wednesday of the month for me and my treatment stuff, so I've got to go get my levels checked. So I apologize. I'll be slipping out a few minutes early to run over to the CTC.
We understand, Bobby, and we wish you the best. And obviously, with my family background, I completely understand what that scenario is like, and wish you the best.
But better living through chemistry.
That's right. Real quick, as we go to our topic and our guest today, the topic we're talking about again is mentoring, and I did a real quick Google search and found something interesting, and it said that a mentor is an individual, usually older, always more experienced, who helps and guides another individual. And 20-plus years ago, Anthony Correia taught my EMT class, so he's older, obviously he's more experienced, and he helped and guided me to get my EMT card. So with that introduction, Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's go right into our topic of mentoring.
Wow. Well, that's Aaron's same spiel, too. So if everybody doesn't know, we're all Mercer County, New Jersey guys, so this ought to be interesting. If a little skeletons come out of the closet, I'm really sorry, guys. Don't mean to do it to you. I started in the fire service in 1976 in Hamilton, New Jersey as a volunteer. Got involved with Career EMS, which at that time was also doing firefighting back in New Jersey. Became a paramedic. Ended up out in Missouri where I was thrust into a fire chief's position from an assistant chief's position. Quite a learning experience, and some of those experiences from Missouri we'll kind of discuss today, not in detail, but the impacts of mentoring. I then came back to New Jersey and became a director of a combination department for 10 years. Retired full-time from that position, but I'm still working part-time as a medic, part of a county tech rescue team, a hazmat team, doing teaching for various organizations. I'm advocate. I'm the lead advocate for New Jersey National Fallen Firefighters. So my goal is to promote realistic safety. I don't like the way that safety's been maligned lately, and we have to have a certain amount of safety, and we'll talk about that in mentoring. Most recently, I got chosen by First 20 to be on one of their boards to talk about firefighter fitness and also promote how firefighters, our task assignments as firefighters and what we can do to be more fit. So I'm real honored to got there. I'm sure there's a lot. Oh, and of course I can't forget I did complete the Executive Fire Officer program, which is what made a big difference in my life, being a firefighter and a fire officer. So that's a little snippet. If you guys want to throw in any other dirty laundry, go for it.
I think both of us could, and we'll probably leave it alone. I do want to remind everybody, if you're on here and you're watching us live, you can ask us a question at #FETalk on Twitter, #FETalk, and we'll try to answer your questions. And actually, Anthony's one who typically is on here asking us questions, which is sort of how we got to today's topic. But
one from Anthony Correia from Garner, watch it, because I got a nephew that's he owes me a couple.
Absolutely. Getting into the topic of mentoring, and back to you again, Anthony, is before we went live today, you were telling us that your son's now in the fire service, the same place where you got your start at. So I would think, as a father of a son, not only that, but a fellow firefighter, you know, the mentoring and making sure somebody is mentoring your son as he enters the fire service is an important topic. So, you know, you really came up with the idea for the topic today. Why don't you tell us why it's so important to you?
Sure. Let me give you a little story, because it'll teach you how you also need to think about learning how to do mentoring. So my son calls me, and I'm real proud. Dad, you know, grew up through the fire service, the fire chief, and his son, the new firefighter EMT, calls for advice. So he calls, he gives me the story of what's going on and the problem he has, and we have this discussion for about 10-15 minutes. So then I go, Brandon, you know, I think this is what you need to do. This is the best way to do it, and I'm feeling all proud because I'm giving him my experience and mentoring this young cub up, so he'll be the best of the next generation of firefighters and EMS personnel. And he says to me, but Dad, that's not the answer I wanted to hear. And I think that's germane to the thing, because we pontificate our opinion, and a lot of times our opinion is not what they want to hear. So whoever we're mentoring, we need to find a connection first. And why I think mentoring is important, I think it's critical. The failures in the fire service usually are not due to tactical error, to strategies, to incident command. It's all due to usually the personnel skills, the people skills that fail. And a lot of times we have people who are the best firefighters in the world, but they don't have the interpersonal skills to do the job. And I submit to you that before you even put somebody out on a fire ground, in a training ground to become a firefighter, you need to test them for their interpersonal skills and their ability to get along with everybody and do the job, follow rules, et cetera, et cetera. And I've come up with a little acronym that people should have, and it's HEART. It's you should be honorable, ethical, accountable, responsible, and trustworthy. And there's another one you want to add, integrity. And I was going to make it iHeart, but I didn't want to get sued by that radio station because I couldn't afford it. So I figure I'll make it Hardy. So you should be honorable, ethical, accountable, responsible, trustworthy, and have integrity. And I think, well, I know that's the things a mentor should be instilling in new recruits. How to have all of those those attributes. But I believe that, you know, if you do have good mentoring, it will make the organization. When you don't have good mentoring and you have generation and a generation of fire service might only be a couple years because you had a growth spurt through hiring or new volunteers. Your organization was down, and all of a sudden you got 10 more 2 years later and 10 more 2 years later. So a generation doesn't have to be 10 or 15 years. And if you're not instilling the right ethics and attributes in these firefighters early on, your organization is going to fail. And I've actually witnessed that. So what I'm talking about is not from a lot of successes I've had, it's failures I've had to deal with also and learning from them.
Awesome. Doing a little homework before we started, a shameless plug for my friend Frank Viscuso and his book Step Up and Lead, which I think is an excellent book available from Fire Engine Book and Videos. But in it, Frank has a chapter that talks about mentoring, and I just wanted to cover what he said briefly. And he said that, you know, a good mentor is someone who will educate and prepare people and their skill set. We just talked about that a little bit. Instill the right values and attitude. Help preserve the rich history and traditions. Provide a program and a standard for evaluation, and encourage all members to be proactive in developing the team. And I think those are great bullet points of what we're talking about today. But I think each of us could probably bring an example of, you know, either a mentoring opportunity we've had or a mentor who, you know, helped us get where we are today. And just wanted to see if one of the three of you wanted to chime in on that.
Sure. It's absolutely the case, and you know, I know now over the last 10 years or so we've started to develop mentoring programs throughout the country in both career and volunteer departments. You join a department or you're going through Proby school and they partner you with a mentor that's going to kind of, like we said, take you under your wing and so forth. We don't necessarily do it where I work. It's kind of unofficially done, and I think that in most places, if there isn't an official mentoring program, there is an unofficial mentoring program. I know when we hire guys, they get placed on certain platoons where the bosses feel that that's where they're going to get the best mentoring, and or they're going to get training and some extra stuff other than what they got coming out of the academy. So I look at it that way as one form of it, and the other form of it is, you know, as a kid growing up, you know, I don't think I realized I was being mentored by a couple of the older folks in the firehouse. But when I looked back on it, there is no question about that they mentored me. And they watched out for me. They said, hey, kid, you're really screwing this up, or hey, kid, this is how you should do it. You know, and I guess I was very fortunate enough that I had some of those folks in my life, and to this day still have some of those folks in my life. But you've got to be open to taking that advice, and sometimes when the young guys are around, you know, they're not so open to that, especially today's generation's a little different. So how we discuss that with them, I had this conversation last night actually with E.J. Mascaro a little bit about what's going on in Charleston and how he's being looked at to do certain things with guys, not in an official capacity, but just in the firehouse when he's working. And you know, I think it goes to the heart of it. And I know, you know, Tony knows some of the guys who have mentored probably you and I, Steve. And, you know, I was fortunate. I think I got it in two separate ways, both through the volunteer and career side, but I got it on the operational side by an old-timer named Steve LaChance, who was the fire chief in New Egypt when I was a little kid. And he was the reason I wanted to become a fireman originally, because he brought the fire truck to the elementary school. And I thought, wow, this is cool. And it was my friend's dad and all that. And when I joined a department, he really looked out for me. And when I became the volunteer chief, he was the deputy chief, even though he was 30 years older than me. And he really kept me in line. And then, so that was my operational mentor. And then as I moved through my career, I ended up becoming a fire commissioner. And I look back on who taught me what it was to be a fire commissioner and how to do things properly administratively. And it was a fellow named Tom Flanagan in Hamilton, who has been a commissioner for a long, long time and actually just came back to it. So sometimes you don't even realize that they're mentoring you, but these guys, they're good, and maybe that's how good they are, that you don't even realize it at times.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's a great point that, you know, when we talk about a mentoring, you know, you can have a formal mentorship program, mentoring program, where someone's assigned to somebody, field training, that sort of thing. But I think all of us probably have those people, like Aaron just described, that we didn't realize at the time that they were mentoring us, but we realize today the little things they did for us, the guidance they provided us, the example that they gave for us, really shaped us into who we are today. And I want to relate that back to how important it is for us now to make sure that we're behaving in a manner that the next generation we talk about so often is seeing the right example, and they're getting that mentoring opportunity from us, because we very easily could arrogantly take advantage of the situation and our successes in life and not pass it on, as Chief Goldfeder talks about in his book. And I think that's a big part of it, is we're talking about is passing on our knowledge. And the other day I was talking to a training officer and about sharing information, and he says, "How dare you as a chief share information? You know, that's not what you're supposed to do." And we chuckled because we were both joking. But unfortunately, there is an opinion among some people that there's a lot of people in the fire service that think if they keep all their information to themselves, that they'll be the smartest guy on the block. And it's not about being the smartest guy on the block. It's about being the smartest department on the block, the smartest company on the block. And we've got to share that information.
I find I'm most successful when others accomplish things. The organization is successful. That's when I'm successful. I can't be successful by myself, so that's why mentoring is important, to pass it down the line.
Yep. Anthony, in your experience, does anybody stand out as a mentor that helped you get to where you were? Or,
absolutely. A few of them, believe it or not, all the way back in high school, I had Mrs. Jerry Bryant, who was an English teacher and a drama teacher, and I did a lot of things backstage in the play, and she was very supportive in the fire service. It was my first chief, George Evans, and I could say he was a mentor to all of us. A great guy. He's living out in Hemet, California. Why he didn't stay on and become a career chief somewhere, I don't know. And Bob Brandt from Public Service became my children's third grandfather. Called him Pop, old man. But he had a lot of little sage advice, and all these guys were unofficial mentors. And as you all said, we had them, but that's what's missing today, and that's why we need to form a more formal mentorship process so it doesn't get missed. But there was a way in this fire service, and I know I talked to Bobby on the phone a while back, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and we've all talked about that happen, but it's not happening now. So we need to get that mentoring, and without it, I said it's my submission to Firehouse, Plug Bob, is that we need to mentor a model today, but it needs to be formal. But before I go into the formal mentoring, the informal mentors, many of you out there that are listening are informal mentors. So be aware of how you present yourself day in and day out. From the time that you walk into that station till you leave, the things that you do on social media, people are watching you. People are following you. And some of the modeling, I wrote a blog a while back, Cool Words Don't Make Firefighters, and there's a lot of younger firefighters that are writing a lot of cool stuff on their blogs and wearing the cool T-shirts, but they're not doing the job because they watch somebody else talk the talk, but not walk the walk the way they should have.
Absolutely. Bobby, real quick, would you like to touch on a mentor?
Yeah, I'll tell you that, we've all had mentors throughout our lives, and in the fire service, for me, it was Tommy Brennan and still Chief Brunacini, who does a lot for me, and Chief Coleman. I've been very blessed to get great advice and counsel from all three of those guys. But on a personal side, there's two guys that really mean the world to me, and one of them, his name is Boston, and he owns a shoe shine business called Shines and Smiles, and he's actually got two locations in the airport and one in Tulsa, and he's just a really gentle, loving, beautiful man, and I see him all the time when I'm in the airport, and he always raises my spirits, and he's just a neat guy, genuinely neat guy. And the other fella runs a ministry. His name's Nasir, and he runs a ministry called Wisdom Ministries. If you've never heard of it, Google it. It's pretty cool. But he was Muslim and developed the worst case of shingles that ever happened to anybody in history, and for the Toronto hospital, and they gave him up for dead. And he was praying and praying and praying, and then he had a vision and runs this incredible ministry. He's just this really great guy, and just learn a lot from being around him. So people come in and out of your life on the professional side. Maybe it's great firefighters, people I've had a chance to hang around with, like Admiral Moore. He's been a great mentor to me. but even my sons, I learn a lot from my sons. So I think we're all leaders and mentors of different people all the time, and we just don't know how we're touching somebody. But you know, my uncles who were Catholic priests were great mentors to me. My dad, obviously. But you know, on the professional side, I'd have to say, you know, Tommy and Alan and Ronnie and those men were really tremendous blessings on the fire side. Mr. Biachini, who runs this company, has been a great mentor to me, and as far as business goes and stuff like that I know very little about. I'm still a neophyte in the business side of the world, but he lets me, you know, operate without having any real knowledge of what I should be doing, just intuitively what I think I should be doing. So I think mentoring is so important, and I think that, you know, Tony said it best. Character really does matter, and integrity and honesty and being the same person when you're talking in front of the fire group or your volunteers as when you're off duty. You know, if off duty you're breaking all the rules and acting like an idiot, just because when you put your uniform on, you're not a different guy. So, you know, your character matters 24/7, 365, and it doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes. I got the coolest thing. If I could just dominate the conversation for 2 more seconds, then I'll go away and go get all my blood work done, go get needles stuck in me for an hour. But I got this letter from a firefighter, and he's a retired chief, and it's probably one of the most beautiful letters I've ever read. And he wrote a really cool little booklet for firefighters called Pocket Guide to Safety, little black book, and we're talking with him right now about trying to publish some of it. And he talks a lot about character, and he wrote it from a federal penitentiary in Georgia, where he's serving 4 years for internet porn. And he tells an incredible story about his fall from grace and how easy that trap was to fall into, and he doesn't hide it, and he wouldn't have any problem with me telling you about it, and he does it as a warning, as a mentoring to all of us out there, that those traps are out there and how easily one can get caught up in it and lose everything but your good name. And he's kept his good name. He made a mistake, but he's kept his good name, and he's still reaching out. So he's mentoring in a way, probably to thousands, so I think that you've got 3 of my mentors on this conversation. I think the world of Aaron Hiller. I've learned a great deal from Aaron Hiller. I've learned incredible stuff from Steve Pegram. I mean, I can't wait to hear him keynote at FDIC. I think he's going to share his ability to mentor to a much broader audience into the future. I think he's going to be someday considered an icon of the fire service. You just see it in everything he does. And Tony is such a blessing. Tony and I aren't allowed to have phone conversations because they go for 5 hours. But thank you for letting me be on here today and talk about something that I think is so important. You know, everything we do should be respectful of everybody around us, and if we always keep that first, respectful to their humanity and their godliness, and then I think we'll be okay. Two right now are great mentors, and so continue to share, you guys, and I'm going to slip away.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby.
I think Bobby hit. You got to hire, whether it's volunteer or career. When I say hire, please take volunteer. You got to hire for character first. You got it, and I think Bernalillo County, New Mexico, does it well because they have a firehouse etiquette that explains how their expectations of you, of how you should perform, everything from answering the phone to talking to officers, how to do your checklist, and it's all about attitude. And that's kind of the start of the mentoring. It's not a one-on-one or a two-on-one process, but it's the start. And I think if people use that type of model when you walk them in the door, when you're recruiting them a lot less before they start, but you got to tell them the real story of your organization and the expectations, and you have to highlight the character of that it's the character you're looking for first. We're a service organization first, and I think people forget that. So if we hire for character for a service organization, if the people don't meet that, we say, no offense to you, but this might not be the organization for you, even though you think you're ready to bust down doors, open holes in roofs, and drag hose lines through 20-story buildings.
Absolutely, and Bobby made a great point, I think, in that, you know, we default to, when we talk about mentorship and mentors, fire chiefs, company officers, people we worked with in our careers, but we forget the people that affected us morally and ethically in our lives. And Bobby, you know, hit on that. And you know, all morning I've been thinking about the mentors that wore a white helmet, you know, 25 years ago, and showed me the way. And you know, once again, Bobby gave me that gut check again. That, you know, just as important as that is my father-in-law, who taught me how to be a dad and how to be a husband, and those things too. So I think it all ties together. But Anthony, you started talking a little bit about formal mentor programs, and maybe Aaron can chime in on this as well as he travels. And if you can admit that in our organization we don't really have a formal mentoring program that we call that, we do assign a training officer to a new recruit and things like that. And I think I do a lot of informal mentoring just from chatting with firefighters and company officers, and especially people that are moving towards promotion. But I'd like to hear, you know, a little bit more of what formally you guys have seen and do when it comes to mentoring.
Well, I'll tell you, Steve, first I got to tell you, honestly, I've had the ability in my organization to be able to build a little bit of a formal mentoring, but for various extraneous issues, and it's why it's an important discussion today, to build out the formal mentoring program that I'd like to see. And I think, first of all, it's because people don't see the importance of it. So by the end of this discussion, hopefully you'll see that. But once you put that, the importance, and people start putting it together, the things they need to understand, you need to have a plan. You can't just go, you know what, I went to a class once and I'm going to be teaching mentoring tomorrow. That just doesn't work that way. And come on, we all did it. We came back when we were young. Chief, just went to FDIC. We got to change the way we drag hose lines through the building. And they're going, yo, kid, take it easy. Go on, relax. Go sit down. We'll talk to you in a little while. So you need to develop a plan. And when you put it to plan, just like any other planning process, it's a project. You need to make sure all components of it, and important components to me is both the expectations of who the mentor is, what the qualities of the mentor is, and what they're supposed to bring to the program. But just equally as important is what the mentee, the person that you're bringing up, that you're training, what their expectations are. You've got to explain it to them, and that's got to be in the program. And an important part that we don't like to do on the human resource side, but is extremely important, is measurement. We have to have a feedback loop. We have to have measurement that we're having. Where are we going? Are we going forward? Are we going backward? Or are we the same place? So you need to have a checklist that you're meeting your goals and objectives along the way. And I think we try to just wing it too much instead of, and in the fire service, and Steve and Aaron, you know it. In the business, Steve, you know it as a chief. You know, it's all about numbers. If you go to the city council and say, I need money because people are dying, they're going to go, thank you very much, Chief. Will you be submitting your resume to your next job, you know, tomorrow? It's all about numbers. It's all about having information. And a mentoring program has to be organized, structured, and it has to have a feedback loop. And it also has to recognize that not every person that is brought in as a mentor is right for that person that they're taking under their wing. So you have to meet the right personality with the right personality. And as Aaron said it earlier, and my good friend Tiger Schmittendorf does a great Xbox to the alarm box, you need to take the time to understand this younger generation. If we're complaining about that younger generation and not understanding them, it's our fault. We need to take the time to understand it. And that's part of the formal mentoring process, is to build in how to get into, how to understand the people that we're talking to. And in the volunteer service, we might be taking in today's day and age, 40, 50-year-old people who have retired or their kids are growing up and are looking for something to do. So we need to know how to still connect with them also.
I agree with you, Tone. I think you do, and the numbers are an issue. Justifying things are usually done through numbers, and that's not always easy in this case, because how do you justify it other than, well, we've got 10 new recruits and we've mentored them and they're doing so this, and this, but I think maybe you look at it through your recruitment retention stuff, because I talked to a good friend of mine yesterday for quite a while, and he echoed the same thing that others are echoing to me, is we can get them in, but we're not keeping them. And I was just in Lancaster, Pennsylvania yesterday, and met with some guys from the Lancaster Firemen's Association. And for those of us on the East Coast, that is a very well-known and very well-respected group of men out there doing that job. And I spoke with Ed Knight yesterday about it, and one of the questions was, how can we foster this? How can we get better retention? And those are the kind of numbers I think we need to show. And a mentoring program in each firehouse is definitely one way. Listen, if I get the kids in, or I get the 40-year-olds in, and I get them through fire school or their essentials classes or whatever it may be, that's only a piece of the pie. Now, how do I keep them and make them fruitful parts of our organization? And I think that is where your number justification starts coming in to the town fathers and to the boards of fire commissioners and to state funding organizations and so forth. And that is somewhat difficult to do, but there's groups that need it, and there's groups that have a serious, and Tony has said this to me over and over again, this is something that needs to be done on a grand scale. And just those two conversations I had yesterday both led to this type of mentoring.
2 points well taken, Aaron. First of all, people mistake field training officers and field training for mentoring. That's not mentoring. You're teaching specific tasks and checkbooks that you want them to meet in skills and strategy of firefighting, EMS, or hazmat. And the part of mentoring that a lot of people forget, and I know we know it, but we need to transmit it to everybody, is mentoring officers. We're not mentoring building the new officers. Our succession planning at every level in the fire service is not where it needs to be. So we're mentoring in the new guys. And I can tell you from experience of watching, the breakdown is at recruitment by not telling them. We say, hey, you want to join this fire department, you want to fight fire, cut people out of the cars, you're going to do it daily. You got to tell them the truth. Look, you're going to join a fire department, fire EMS, and you're going to occasionally fight a fire, occasionally do an extrication, one good medical when most of the times it's taking Mrs. Smith's hand. Tell them the reality so when they come in they're not disillusioned. But 2, then the mentoring continues, and you show them where it's important to the service end of the business that we have. But what are we doing with our officers? I can tell you both on career and volunteer side, we're not doing what we should be doing, especially those lieutenants and captains. They're the key to the department. They make your department work with their small groups of 4 or 5 people on their shifts. So not only do we need to be mentoring the new guys in, we need to be mentoring to build new officers. And far before they get those bars or horns, we need to know that they're competent for that position. And thank God only New Jersey has a civil service system like it does, because all the rest, Steve, in your department, you really can recognize those guys that even though they put stripes on, they really have spots, and they're a leopard. They're not a tiger, and you know it. And you can say, look, you made your presentation look impressive, but you're really not ready to be an officer yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Tone. I think that the company officer has always been and will always be one of the most functional and key roles in any fire department. The firefighters can be wonderful, the chief can be wonderful, but without that middle management being very, very competent in what they do, the rest can fall apart quickly, and we've all experienced it in our careers. I do believe there's a reason why the FDNY sends guys to officer school when they're going to get made. When we were getting made at work, they were making the first 4 captains in our firehouse. And one of the things that the chief demanded was that we all go to NFA leadership training. So they actually brought Chief Kensler in, and he did the NFA leadership program for us. I guess 1, 2, 3, or whatever it was at the time. It was 15 years ago now, but so that's important. But the other thing that Bobby hit on, Tone, and that you hit on was, and you talked about the heart eye, and it was funny because I saw Bobby smiling when he saw that, because it's absolutely true. And it's funny because you and I talked about it on a flight overseas in January, and then I sat in Bobby's speech, his keynote, well, not keynote, but his introductory speech at FDIC, and it was about honor and integrity and character. And that is something that not just the fire service, but society in general sometimes lacks. And from a personal note, listen, we have all made those mistakes where we have shown our flaws in our character and our integrity or our honesty. And that's why, guys go to confession. That's why they go to Yom Kippur services, because we've made those errors, and we need to fix it. And I know from a personal standpoint, I've had a very tumultuous year, and it's not over yet. But it was a mistake. You make mistakes, and you have to move from them. And as a good mentor, whoever it is you're mentoring, whoever it is that's looking up to you, and that's the key. We don't always know who's looking up to us or really viewing us in the firehouse or in our lives in general. We know our kids look up to us. We know, our spouses or our parents or whoever, and our coworkers. You got to try and do it as best you can all the time, because it's when you're not paying attention to who's looking at you and you slip up and they see that you just provided something that you didn't want them to have, or something you didn't want them to follow. And like I said, from a personal standpoint, I felt it. I took deep reflection and went, man, these are the things that I would not want my children to see or do. So then why would I see or do that? And it's the same thing with our firefighters coming through the ranks. It's absolutely the same thing. And when Bobby said that at the speech, and when I listened to you, and then you just said it again this afternoon, those are very important parts of this. And it's very important for all of us to get that word out.
Sorry. 3 quick things. One, that's why God has seen in my family that my youngest son is irreverent, so he'll always make sure I can go to confession daily. I already got a lecture already this morning from him. 2 is the thing about finding out later. It was 10 years down the line, and I have people contact me, or other people say, you know what, that person said that you did a good job in school or class. And so far, thank God, you and Steve haven't said anything bad about my my EMT instructorship stuff. So I guess I did okay back then. And the last quick thing is, I used to be one of those guys back in the day to tell the firefighters, hey, just be like me, be one of the guys. And when you're bringing new guys in, whether it's career or volunteer, they are not one of the guys. They are a recruit. They need to learn and earn their way up the steps. So don't bring them in and right away, especially if you have junior firefighters, they are not one of the guys. They need to be mentored. They need to have field training. They need to jump through some hoops to prove that they are a true firefighter, not just in the firefighting sense, but in the attitude and behavioral sense. And I'll shut up for a while, Steve.
Absolutely.
Not long.
No, I think it's all great. I wanted to share something we do in Goshen, and even though it was my idea, I'm not saying that it's the best thing to do, but it's been an interesting process, and that is, when I came up in the fire service, especially in the volunteer fire service, we had annual awards. And, generally the chief officers and the hierarchy of the organization would decide who the fireman of the year is, and the different awards. And we took a different spin here a few years ago, and I basically said, who do you want to nominate for an award and why? Anybody could nominate anybody for anything. And if you wanted to name the award, name the award. And it could be something funny. It could be something somebody did on a run. It could be training related, whatever. Just, blab your mouth and let me know what you think people are doing that is good. And why I think this ties into this is, what was interesting is the majority of the people that wrote something and took the time to write down and put their thoughts together were the newest people that had 2 years or less on the department. And when I go back and I read what they wrote, they were talking about their mentors. Now, we don't have a formal mentorship. These weren't people that we assigned to them as their mentor or even their field training officer. It just kind of happened. It was the person they ended up standing next to out on the bay floor. And I just want to share with you one of the nominations that I got, and this is pretty interesting, I think, related to the topic. I'm not sure what you want to call this award, but I nominate Firefighter X, and I'll leave the name out because he hasn't gotten his award yet. Since I've gone on as a volunteer at Goshen, he's taught me most of the things that I know about fire and EMS. He's never too busy, never too tired to help anyone with anything. He's a great role model for any fireman, and he's calm under pressure on every type of run, doesn't get angry, but helps you through everything. He leads by example and is a hard worker, and he's dedicated to the organization, and I think for that he deserves an award.
Wow.
So that's a statement from a guy who's got a year on the job.
That's a job description.
That's
there,
very
Steve.
telling.
And the guy that he's talking about has 5 years.
Wow.
Not 15, not 20, not 25. He's not a company officer. He's not even a full-timer. And I think that's what we're talking about here is who your mentor is not your rank, it's not your title, it's not even your experience level, like I started off the conversation, but it's what you do and how you treat people.
Yeah.
It
absolutely is. And you know, Tony, you brought up a really good point. I started in the fire service. I know Steve started in the fire service. We were junior members, you know, and in Jersey in the 80s, junior members got away with a whole lot of things that you could not do today, you know.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I can tell you that I probably saw just as much work in fire from the time I was 14 to 18 as I did 18 to 30. But those guys, if we catch them early and we give them the right knowledge and we give them the right fire department life lessons, not just stretch and line like you said, Tone, not just cutting a roof. And I can tell you, my side company, we do a lot of training all over the country and internationally. And one of the things we do a big weekend, and I'm not plugging it, I'm not even saying where it's at, but one of the things that the local chiefs in that region said to me was, we had a lot of junior members come to your last training, but they really couldn't do much because you guys were fighting fire and we couldn't have them in there. So we had them throwing some ladders and maybe helping you hump hose from the rig to the door, and that was kind of it. And it clicked in my mind, and I said, all right, why don't we do a junior program that weekend too? Well, the junior program has morphed. Last year it was just 1 day of hands-on for all the juniors with 3 really solid firefighters teaching them skills. And we do a Friday night lecture, which is usually something, you know, really pertinent to engine or truck or whatever. And we're doing that again this year. But one of the things that we threw in, we said, you know what, we're going to do a junior lecture, a junior pro-B lecture for the new guys, the ones who can't fight fire yet or anything like that. And we called it the Junior Pro-B Orientation, What Have I Signed Up For? And, you know, this is something you can do in your own firehouse. You don't need us to do it. And give them that, what have I signed up for? Why is it that I should be following what Timmy Klett says or the 4 ups? You know, if anybody knows Lieutenant Klett from the FDNY, he wrote a piece for Fire Department Training Network years ago called the 4 ups. You know, you shut up, you step up, you clean up, you know, things like that. And you go through these things. And that's what being a part of our organization is. Because if you show us you can do the 4 ups, stretching hose and forcing doors is going to be the easy part. And so when we do this class, we've got 3 guys from around the country who have run junior programs, basically explorer posts and things of that nature, and they're mentoring these kids, and they've mentored lots of them through the years. Who better to do it, you know? And you can do it in your own firehouse, as Tony said. You can make that a formal mentoring program for the younger folks in the department. I just think it's a very valuable tool.
Steve, you know, you brought up a real good point that you've become a mentor very early. So I think when we're mentoring people, is that we tell people, look, people are looking at you early. So not only are they looking at you for succeed, but you may be a year into a company and now you have a new recruit that's got 3 days in a company. He's watching you. So early on, you're becoming a mentor. And you know, man, I can't believe it. It must be age. I had a brain fart. So, But you know, it's critically. It was something that Darren said, but Bobby also said, you know, we got to look at younger. And I always did this as a medic. The newer medics coming out had a lot of new knowledge, and of course, the older medics go, "Ah, kid, you don't know what you're talking about." But I learned a lot of stuff, and I still do from younger medics and younger people. And so you need to listen to the people that you think that you're mentoring, because they're going to add, and that's actually part of the formal mentoring process. It's not a one-way street. It's a conversation. It's an interaction. You're learning from them. They're learning from you. All the time, it's an exchange. It's not somebody just pontificating downward. Oh, I know one of the things I was going to say, and to mentors, somebody's got to have been there, maybe not fighting fire or doing extrication, but they had to have been there running the organization, operating in the organization. It's like me doing line of duty deaths. Unfortunately, our fire department signed line of duty death. I'm on the last team. You can't go talk to the guys who just had a line of duty death. I'm not being smart if you haven't experienced it. So you need people who have experienced things to be the people in doing certain mentoring processes. And I think there were just some key important points that we need to make. And people are watching you all the time, and if you're not going in the right direction, the people that are following you are not going to go in the right direction either.
Tone, do you have I guess a question for you would be, do you have, I'm sure you have written procedures on the mentoring policy that you initiated when you were working?
Yep, I do. And there's some, I sent you some of them.
Right. I think that's something that's key too, is look at departments who have a successful program. Don't reinvent the wheel. You know, we've talked about this over and over again on these shows. None of us want you to reinvent the wheel. We just want you to give credit where credit's due. So reach out to people like Tony and you know, people like
Steve.
Well, I don't know about me, but reach out to folks who you believe can give you that information, and maybe gives you a little inspiration in the meantime too, because we need this. It's part of it. I go back to FDIC, and yes, it's a shameless plug. We're working for fire engineering today, but it's a shameless plug that my first time at at FDIC in Indy, I met Mike Champo and Dave Gallagher and Greg Einsfeld and Bobby Swick, and you know, the names go on and on and on, and it's not to name drop, but these guys were so kind that they just told me anything I needed to know. I asked it, and they had the answers, and I looked at the way in which they conducted themselves, and I remember sitting in a class saying, man, one day I wish I could do that. You know, it'll be 20 years from now, but I'd love to do that. And you know, life comes in full circles. I'm very blessed that I've taught at FDIC for many years. The same thing, I had the open enough mind when I was a kid. I went to University of Illinois, to the Fire Service Institute, and got the fire department to send me for the survival and RIP program there. And back then, you know, it was the program, and it's still a fantastic program, but everybody's copied it. But you know, those guys went out there, and you talked to the column A's and the Hoffs, and I sat in the classroom almost bewildered in the first 10 minutes that I was with these guys. And then I realized they were passing on literally decades and decades of knowledge that they've gotten through the job, and they were sending it on to me. And there were no egos, and there was no arrogance, and there were no blogs being written, and they weren't patting themselves on the back saying, look at me. And again, I sat in that audience and thought, wow, what I could do, maybe, you know, 20 years from now, I'll get that chance to pass on what I know. And I think the point that you made and Bobby made, Tone, was it might only be a year from now that people are looking at you. It's not that 20 years down the road. And in my career, I became an instructor way younger than I should have, became a chief way younger than I should have. I know Steve went through the exact same thing, because we were going through college together when all this was happening in our careers, and we were in our 20s, and which wasn't that long ago.
You guys were chiefs like when you were 10, right?
Yeah, something like that. But that's the key, and it's who's looking up at you, and you're not looking down at them. You're looking even with them. And I've seen guys who wanted to be mentors, but they were talking down, or they were looking down at the probie. Listen, yeah, the probie has to respect the elder, and the probie has to show that proper respect. We're a paramilitary organization, but it's all got to be done in the right way.
And
And
the mentor must,
mentoring is.
like I say, the mentor has to be learning too.
Absolutely.
If they're not learning from each mentoring experience and they're not doing something, the other thing is we can't mentor them to be the firefighter we are. We need to mentor them to be the firefighter or the paramedic or whoever of the future. And the tactics and strategies of today, we can't teach. We can teach them that, but we need to teach them to reach for the future, to learn for the future, to have open minds to learn, and so say, hey kid, this is the way I do it. Well, some of the stuff, the way I used to do it, like using cravats in EMS or what we were using, hose strap. Some fancy hose strap we were talking about. A piece of rope does that. That's what I was taught. So yeah, some of the old stuff works, but we need to encourage people to look to the future, to have open minds to learn, and not just go, well, that's what Aaron told me, or that's what Steve told me. No, Aaron told me to look to the future. Here's a tool now. Look, build new tools, not just physically, but mental tools for the future.
Absolutely, and I love the fact that both of you brought up the being junior firemen and cadets or whatever you call it in different parts of the country. I think that I know a lot of people, the three of us included, know how important that was, and I think we've lost that in a lot of communities, a lot of places. They don't want to be bothered with the younger kids, the kids hanging out at the firehouse, and I think we've lost a lot by not having that. Now we complain about recruitment and retention. Some of our recruitment and retention problems are because we didn't want to be bothered with having the high school kids hanging out at the firehouse and taking the time to mentor them and train them. And I do think there's a difference between the training part and the mentoring part, but I think all of us are kind of chuckling right now. We probably need to go back and look at that, and how do we get the younger generation, get the hook in, if you will, like it got into all of us, so we can prepare that next generation of firefighters, and especially in parts of the country where you guys still are, where it's very common still to have very active volunteer and combination fire departments. When I moved out to the Midwest, it was a little bit strange for me because out here, majority of the fire departments are career. Even very small towns have career or partially career departments. It was, difficult for me at first to get used to. But I think that there's still a strong foundation, and obviously a lot of people are pushing for the volunteer fire service especially to survive as long as possible, strictly from a fiscal standpoint. But we need to invest mentally, physically in that younger generation, and we that are mentors now, if you will, need to make sure we're passing it on to those that are below us, but also as the example I gave, that 5-year guy's mentoring the 1-year guy. And that's awesome when that happens. And nobody planned it, nobody told them to do it, it just happened. But when stuff like that happens, I want to remind people, you got to tell them thank you, or give them an award. I mean, how much does a plaque cost or a piece of paper? Right. But just as nice, and I think we've all experienced this, is when somebody walks up to you and pats you on the back and says, good job. And I think that's important too. And we forget to do that a lot.
And that's one of the things we should be doing to those people we are mentoring too. You're right, Steve. We need this, those, hey, on a regular basis, good job. And even if you screwed up, it's like, you know what? And by the way, I'm mentoring a young lady where I ride as a medic who's a EMT for a couple of years. I'm mentoring her, and she's doing a great job. And it's a two-way street. But I got to recognize even when she screws up and say, you did this part good, but you know what? You had a little screw up, but we're going to get it next time. And you got to continue to build their confidence. And you're not going to do that, as Aaron said, by talking down to them or think that you are. Mentoring is just a communication process. It's a way of understanding, talk to people, to have your minds connect. And so, but for a mission bigger than you, which is the organization.
Absolutely. Aaron, some final words. We're almost out of time.
Not a whole lot. I think we covered a lot. I think we probably brought up some good points that guys can use. Hit us up if you have questions. Find us on Twitter. I'm at OnScene on Twitter. Tony's at T Correia. I know you've got yours at your chief one there. So hit us up on Facebook or Twitter or email us. Let us know if we can help you, because these are important things for the future of the fire service. And again, I'm just blessed to be a part of it, and I'm blessed that fire engineering would put me on here with you guys. And I look forward to this every month. I truly do. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. I don't tell everybody have a safe tour or have a safe weekend, because safe isn't always very fun. But don't get yourself hurt. That's all, and have a good time.
Absolutely, and we're going into the Independence Day weekend, so obviously it's a holiday, but it also means a whole lot to our country and our nation. So make sure you show a little respect for that too this weekend. And thank Anthony and Aaron every month coming on and participating. And if you have ideas for future Google Hangouts, training-related topics you'd like to hear us talk about, or suggest a host, like Aaron said, we're on Facebook, Twitter. You can get a hold of us. Again, thank you to Penwell Fire Engineering for all they do for us individually and as a fire service as a whole. And we'll be back on Wednesday, August 5th for the next installment of the Training Humpday Hangout. Until then, take care.
Take care. Great. Thank you.